Welcome to On the Mark with Peter Buckley and Mark O'Donnell. Our podcast is dedicated to helping Christians target the right priorities in their apostolic and interior lives.
Well, hello and welcome back to On the Mark. I'm Peter Buckley, your host, and joining me and joining us as always is Mark O'Donnell. Mark, welcome.
Peter, thanks for having me.
We're winding things down here. Our little trip through the Acts of Apostles is coming to an end. We're finishing up with Acts 10, and this is describing the conversion of this guy Cornelius. So who is Cornelius? Well, he's described to us as a devout centurion of the Italian cohort. He was a God-fearing man. He prayed a lot, prayed constantly, as we're told, and he was generous. He gave alms liberally. He also was a man of some stature, family, servants, friends. And one day we're given this image of him praying, and an angel appears to him and tells him his prayers have been answered. And then for him to send for Peter, who at the time was in Joppa. And so right off the bat, it looks like Cornelius is favored by God, yet interestingly, he isn't Jewish, or he's not of the lost house of Israel. So what do you make of that? What do we think of this?
We make of it not to judge our work colleagues who do not share our faith. Certainly God acts through the sacraments, but he is also free to act directly with anyone who makes the effort to have a relationship with him. We can't write off anybody, yet we have a tendency to do so. If someone is not going to church, if they are living in an irregular situation or engaged in less than virtuous activity on a regular basis, it's easy to simply judge them as unfit and write them off. Over time, we observe how our colleagues conduct themselves, and they observe how we conduct ourselves. However, these observations do not always reflect the entire character of a person and can lead to judgments that can be false. So the first point is, do not be too quick to judge. Instead, try to understand them.
Right. But isn't there always some form of judging others, if for no other reason than to know how we should interact with them?
I would say we need to understand and evaluate others in order to know how to interact with them. Judging implies imputing moral culpability to a person, whereas evaluating their behavior simply guides us in how we should interact with them. For example, if we hear a colleague lie on the phone to a client, we should filter their words accordingly when they tell us things or give us advice. We need to learn how to ask the right questions to get the information we need to do our jobs well and protect ourselves and our companies. Romano Guardini, in his book on the virtues, has a chapter on understanding. And it describes exactly this difference between judging and evaluating another person. The former is dangerous, and Jesus tells us not to do it. The latter is necessary to know how to enter into a relationship with them. If we can learn the difference between judging and evaluating one another, we can become better workers, protect our interests, and maintain relationships that we otherwise would not be able to maintain.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, high up there on the list of non-religious people's criticism of people of faith is this idea of judging others. So this distinction between judging and evaluating is an important one. I mean, vital. It'd probably be helpful if we put a link to the Guardini book in the show notes. But trying to live the virtues at work, so sure they can make us more productive and hopefully give us a better sense of peace. But it's hard to do. Is there anything we can learn from Cornelius to help us to do this?
And what we learn from Cornelius is that we should act on the lights that God gives us. Then we'll receive more lights or even a visit from an angel, if we really knock it out of the park. Consistent prayer and liberal almsgiving are pleasing to God, and he rewards it by sending Peter to visit Cornelius to preach the gospel to him and his family and his friends. Many of our colleagues are great professionals, and they have their lives in order. Otherwise, they would not be where they are professionally and financially. You know that as a financial advisor, and I see that as a realtor. It's really not that much of a stretch for them to add short times of consistent prayer to their morning schedules. They can also readily budget themselves to help local charities, even if they are not currently attending church. Cornelius is a great example of this. I mean, he's a public person, he's known in the community, and he does these two things and is rewarded for it. You know, he's a great role model for the successful professional who wants to become a better person.
He really does seem to be an example of, what many would perceive to be a minor character in the scriptures who can serve as a great example for us. Here he's simply trying to fulfill God's will in the best way he knows how. And God does reward him with more light by sending him Peter in this case. And so he seems to be the kind of figure who even our non-religious colleagues could emulate.
Definitely. The key thing is to act and not remain passive. Cornelius was actively seeking to know the truth by praying constantly and trying to help others by giving alms. Sometimes we need to act to get God to take action. And this is what I learned from Joan of Arc. Historical sources say she frequently used the phrase, act and God will act, to motivate her soldiers in battle and lead them to victory, which is exactly what she did. Furthermore, St. John Henry Newman, a doctor of the church, in one of his sermons said something similar. He said, act up to your light and God will give you more light. So you have two somewhat opposite saints advocating the same practice. And then if you look in the Gospels, the ones who act on faith are the ones who are rewarded. You know, the woman with the hemorrhage, the Syrophoenician woman whose daughter is possessed, the centurion whose servant is sick. You know, they're all rewarded, but we can't hesitate, like Peter did when he was walking on the water to Jesus. He doubts and begins to sink. Still Jesus saves him, but reprimands him for his lack of faith.
Yeah, so as we go on in the story in Acts, Cornelius sends a team to bring Peter. While they're on their way, Peter has this interesting and, in a certain way, a bizarre afternoon dream in which he sees some animals coming down on a sheet and is told to, I'm saying parenthetically here, rise, Peter, kill and eat. He responds that he will not, since he's never eaten anything common or unclean. God takes offense at that. He tells him what God has blessed should not be called common or unclean. And this happens, I think, 3 times. And then Cornelius, his team shows up, and Peter goes back with him. Then we see Cornelius graciously receiving Peter and relates to him his own visit from the angel. He has prepared a group of family and friends to hear Peter. And then almost midstream, Peter realizes the true meaning of his dream. He now realizes that anyone who fears God and does what is right is favored by him. So I guess we should not be too quick to judge, as you were saying earlier.
Exactly. I mean, Peter shows us that our natural reaction is to quickly judge others or situations that God is putting us in or allowing us to suffer without any reference to the message God is seeking to communicate to us. By bringing Cornelius and Peter together, God is expanding the preaching of the gospel to more people, to everyone, really. And that is why we should never write off our colleagues. There's always hope that they will return if they seek and live the truth to the best of their abilities. If they do that, God's going to lead them to himself. You have an example with St. Edith Stein, who said that if we consistently seek the truth, it will lead us to Christ. That's what she did. She was Jewish and she converted to Catholicism after studying the scriptures and reading St. Teresa of Avila. We're not all brilliant philosophers like Edith Stein was, but the lesson can be lived at a more local level as well. I mean, I remember an incident at a local restaurant and bar here in Newton. I used to go there with real estate colleagues and clients to conduct off-hours business and rest a little. I got to know a senior bartender who had an interest in the faith, but he had stopped going to church. I told him he could still read the Gospels and pray for his patrons at the bar while he's serving them, even though he was no longer going to church. I didn't think much of it. Then several weeks later, when I visited again, he recounted an incident with some young customers at the bar. They were hassling him and asking him, hey, old man, what's the meaning of life? And he, deflected the question a few times, but they were insistent. So he finally told them, Seek the truth and live your faith. They took offense, asked for their bill, paid it, and left. So he was dejected. And then two elderly patrons came in and sat in their spot and ordered drinks. And when he served them, they told him they had listened to the entire conversation. They said they were edified by what he told the young people, and that he had done a good deed, even though they rejected his advice. So you never know how things are going to go down. This is especially true with respect to the faith. God is spirit and can move anyone at any time. We just have to help people to be sensitive to those motions of grace and to act on them rather than reject them. We can't see the Spirit of God inspiring others, so we don't know who accepts him and who rejects him. That's one more reason to keep on trying to encourage others to accept him. If we act, he'll act. Not to win a battle like he did with Joan of Arc, but to save a soul, which is much more important, really.
That really is a great anecdote. And I think the message, certainly for you, keep getting out there, and for all of us, to get out there, have those conversations, and have confidence and trust in the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I like to do that, but I've also realized you can't script these things. You can't kind of go out there with an agenda. You have to put yourself out there and then react to the situations as they unfold in front of you. And I do try to force myself to socialize as much as I can with the hope that God will give me an opportunity to help anyone I meet. But in the workplace, I think it's more natural, and it's easier since we know our colleagues somewhat, and we are already seeing them on a regular basis. So our witness can support our words. You need both, I think. I think that's the better way to help others. I mean, they need to be able to lean on us to follow the inspirations God sends them. Just like Cornelius, he leaned on Peter to learn the faith so he could continue doing good in his community.
Yeah, well, that's great. And thank you for that, Mark. Why don't we wrap it up there as we wrap up our discussion on the Acts of the Apostles? Great way to conclude it with Cornelius. Very helpful insights and ideas, so keep up the great work.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Peter.
Thanks for listening to On the Mark with Peter Buckley and Mark O'Donnell. If you enjoy our podcast, be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to be notified every time Peter and Mark release a new episode. And visit us on the web at onthemark.show.